Hello everyone, I'm back again. It's Purple Day on my rainbow bookcases, and I've got my purple She-Ra t-shirt on. She reads. Right, I've got a pile of purple books and a limited amount of time to talk about them. My first is a book of poetry by John McCullough called Panic Response. Now, I've not seen John for years and years, but once upon a time he was a student of mine at UEA, and I'm very proud of him. I'm proud of all of his books. This is his fourth, and this is a poem called Electric Blue. The radiance is visiting again, a bloom of shimmering plankton at low tide that lifts the brutal shore to space. Conditions must be perfect for their blue glow, the darkness total. They must be far from home, completely lost, exiled by currents, then panicked by the foamy smack of breakers. This is no bounty for them, it's horror, this brilliance that quivers, arcs. Picture it now so you'll remember the scene, one lonely midnight when your heart assaults your ribs, the galactic light of tiny selves that never wanted anything like this, but together, finished up, terrified, magnificent, brightly living the only way they know how. I don't know if you'll mind me reading a whole poem. I hope not. He's fantastic though, and you must check out his books. Right, other purple books. This isn't quite purple, it's kind of burgundy, but I don't care. This is my fancy copy of the Hotel New Hampshire by John Irving. I used to have, or still have, a paperback that I first read in 1991. This is a really nice copy, Jonathan Cape copy. Uh, it's not the first edition. Actually, it might be. This is the novel about the family of misfits who leave America and go to live in Vienna. It's the father's idea, and he's a complete eccentric. And the whole thing is about owning a hotel and ending up with a hotel that has hookers living there and a bear working on the reception desk. And we follow this family of kind of strange, um, kind of oversexed people back to America. They're all like characters out of something from Salinger. That's what I always think. The summer my father bought the bear, none of us was born. We weren't even conceived. Not Frank, the oldest, not Franny, the loudest, not me, the next, and not the youngest of us, Lily and Egg. My father and mother were hometown kids who knew each other all their lives, but their union, as Frank always calls it, hadn't taken place when father bought the bear. Frank is the gay one, and I do remember it being a very um, positive portrayal of a gay character in such a straight novel. Bless him. I mean, Irving's very straight, and you really believe in his uh, the love affairs and the marriages between his lead characters, but he does always have queer characters. There's a famous transsexual character in The World According to Garp, who John Lithgow played in the fantastic movie. This was adapted as a movie as well, and it wasn't. It was all right, but it was like kind of selected highlights. There's look a national no a gallery, the Parnassus Gallery, Flying Scotsman bookmark. It's not mine. It must be from the time. Right, you must read John Irving. He's one of those people where I read lots of his books and stopped at some point just about the year 2000, and I haven't gone back and read his more recent ones, which is a shame. But my favourites are around the time of this. Um, the World According to Garp, The Hotel New Hampshire. Those are the ones, I think. This is a lovely collection of stories in a series that Puffin did. Stories for 9-year-olds. They did one for each year group. They seem quite sophisticated to my eyes now. This is edited by Sarah and Stephen Corrin. Uh, it's people like Joan Aiken and James Thurber and Nathaniel Hawthorne telling the story of the Minotaur. And I do wonder if these are probably a bit much now. I don't know. I think they probably wouldn't give these to 9-year-olds. Scheherazade is retold by Stephen Corrin. There was once a king of Persia named Shahryar, who was most devoted to his beautiful queen. He thought she was the most beautiful and loyal wife to him. She, however, only pretended to be devoted to him. One day, Shahryar's brother, who used to go hunting with him, fell ill and stayed behind in the palace while the king was away. Through the window of his room, he was horrified to see the queen unveil her face in the presence of the courtiers. Now, you must understand that in Persia in those days, a woman was strictly forbidden to do this. And besides, the king had expressly instructed her not to leave her rooms. It's funny, when I've worked on books for middle grade kids in recent years and for Puffin, there has been this question of, do I simplify the language? I get notes back and they say, could you simplify these? And I make lists of the words, the disputed words, which are multisyllabic and fun and crunchy. And we toss them back and forth as a kind of lexical tennis. And I say every time, Doctor Who books and Puffin books and Beaver books and Piccolos all fed my greed for difficult words, and I learnt their meanings through context, through looking them up. And as a kid, that was really important. And oddly enough, the words I learnt from things like Doctor Who were words like voluminous and capacious and transdimensional. And they all mean bigger on the inside. And that's what big words are. They're even bigger. So I am well in favour of books for kids, words for kids, stories for kids being more complicated than people would advise. I think they've got to have complicated language in, colourful language, strange language, because it's like returning the favour. The books I read at that age made me love language and literature, and we can't listen to people who tell us to make things simpler, easier, because it's not exact enough. You lose something. Right, I'm going to crack on. Julie Cohen is one of my favourite writers, and years ago she wrote a few novels in this series that Headline did, the Little Black Dress series, which was by different authors. They were kind of sophisticated and sexy Mills and Boons, really. They were romance novels. And this one, Nina Jones and the Temple of Gloom, was slightly gothic and strange. When you're a PA to a celebrity chef who's tastier than one of his own delicious dishes, you can't help loving your job. What's wrong with fancying the pants off your boss? Everything if he's married to somebody else. So when Nina meets sexy Spaniard Juan, she's thrilled to escape to a new life abroad until he does a runner with her hard-earned cash, and she's forced to move into the Temple of Gloom, a gothic flat with some unusual inhabitants. Nina's had enough of bloodsuckers, but is her mysterious neighbour Victor really a vampire? Sometimes it's hard to know who to trust. What I love about Julie is that she really mucks about with genre. She's genre fluid as well, and she'll dip into the gothic. There's a novel of hers that dips into the unexplained, and there's one that's Regency romance, and now she's doing serial killer thrillers. She's great, and you must read her. Heinlein, The Puppet Masters. Heinlein I read when I was, see, it's purple and all the way around. I first read Heinlein when I was a teenager, and I read Stranger in a Strange Land, and loved it. There's kind of dodgy politics around, as there is in lots of kind of 50s writers. This one I read in more recent years. It's a kind of Invasion of the Body Snatchers story, where people have things clinging to the backs of their necks. Soft and clinging, it snuggled up against him, mute and warm. He felt perfectly happy in a mindless sort of way. Quite mindless. The alien clutched and settled, flesh to flesh, tapping into his nervous system, feeding its commands into his brain. He felt nothing, had no worries. He belonged, body and soul, heart and mind, to the slug-like creature. He felt he was safe, among friends, hundreds, then thousands of them, all taken over by the creatures that had come pouring out of the spacecraft, happy and safe and doomed. That's a really good blurb. It's a really good blurb because it's got lots of atmosphere and sensation to it, and silliness, and that lingering sense of oncoming doom. They kind of nicked some of this in Doctor Who during the Chibnall era, the Jodie Whittaker era, with the way they did the Daleks and the way they imagined a Dalek invasion happening through the actual Khaled mutants jumping on people's backs and getting into their minds. Very, very Heinlein. And on that cover, you can see it's almost the same design, very similar to the way they do the Khaled mutants on Doctor Who. Right, I've mentioned this one before and talked about it. Nina Sakovitch, but it's so purple, it has to come into this category today. But I'm going to talk about it again briefly. Tolstoy and The Purple Chair. It's a memoir of reading for a year and reading one book every single day and writing about it. It's about reading as salvation, as self-help, as all those kind of mindful things. But it's a properly healing book, I think. It really does remind you about what reading can do. There's a lovely opening sequence where she settles on this project of getting over grief by reading, and she reads Dracula. Now, this leapt out to me because I've talked before about reading Dracula and what an important book that is to me. While her husband's away, when they're on this trip, she goes off on her bike, carrying a book in my little basket, Dracula by Bram Stoker, along with a water bottle and a packet of chocolate. I rode the winding hills of the old Montauk Highway, a road that stays close to the ocean shoreline, buffered only by scrubland, fir trees and cliffs. After a half hour or so, I stopped my bike by an opening cutting. Through the brush, there, down a little path, I found a perfect spot. A wooden bench stood, rooted to the edge of the cliff, faded to a light, shiny grey by sand, wind and rain, as if buffed and polished, sheltered from the sun by an overhanging scrub tree and facing out over the Atlantic Ocean. The bench was both solitary and encompassing. I could sit there and be alone, and then look up and see the world unfolding before me in a cascade of blue and white waves and glittering sunlight over water. I leaned my bike against a rock and she sounds like somebody who Dracula's going to jump out on, thinking about it, like poor Mina Harker in Whitby. I leaned my bike against a rock, took the book, chocolate and water out of the basket and sat down on the bench to read. I spent my day on that bench, getting up occasionally to stretch and at one point riding off in search of a bathroom and lunch. But I returned to read again, caught up in the Gothic journey of Dracula from Transylvania to England and back again to Transylvania. I travelled over mountains and past crazed villagers, dodging vampires and accompanied by the good guys, Jonathan Harker, Van Helsing, and Mina. We were fighting to save the world from vampire takeover. The suddenly shifting cold breezes of early morning brought me back to where I was, sitting on a bench on a Montauk cliff. I had to return to the hotel and get ready for our dinner out. On the bike ride home, I stopped at a farmer's market and picked up some apples, a chunk of blue cheese, and a loaf of bread. I stopped at a liquor store for red wine and then swerved my way back to the hotel, my bike basket overflowing. Jack wasn't back yet. Great, I thought to myself. I won't get ready for dinner. I'll just keep reading. And this is why the book was leaping out at me. It was anything that gives you permission to call off doing the things you're meant to be doing, to just eat chocolate and drink wine and eat cheese and bread. To stave off hunger, I cut some cheese for myself, loaded it onto a crust of bread and poured out a generous slug of wine. With my hand curled around the glass, I continued to read. Van Helsing was hot on the trail of Count Dracula, closing in on the blood-sucking aristocrat. I was asleep on my book, drained wine glass on the floor, and half the entire blue cheese consumed. When Jack got back from his windsurfing, I didn't even feel him as he slipped onto the couch beside me. When I woke up at 10:30, he was there behind me, snoring away, smelling salty and sweaty. Our dinner reservation was long past. I wriggled into an upright position, poured myself another glass of wine, and finished off Dracula. The next day, I realized I had done it. I had read a book in one day. Life goals, I think they call them. Here's another absolute all-time favorite, and I've definitely talked about this before. Armistead Maupin's Maybe the Moon. 31 years ago, this was published, and I've read it every other year since, I think. And his other books pale beside it for me. This has started to go orangey around the edges, look. That's such a shame. It's so old, and it was so new. And at the time when I got this, I couldn't really afford hardbacks. It was $14.99. It seemed so extravagant. And I bought it at a literary lunch where he was talking in Manchester. And it was such a nice afternoon out with someone who was a friend back then. This novel is about someone of diminutive stature. He finds it hard to get acting roles, who sings like an angel and is inside the suit of a famous film creature. It's analogous to Steven Spielberg's E.T., and it's clearly about that film. But this is a kind of screwball caper that's streaked with pathos and has some wonderful characters in it. And it's a lovely sidestep to Armistead Maupin's Tales of the City. I won't say much more about it. I'll just encourage you to go off and read it. A couple more things left, purple books to talk about. This is a fancy anthology from the 70s, the Oxford Book of Poetry for Children, chosen by Edward Blishen and illustrated by Brian Wildsmith, who clearly had a wonderful time illustrating children's books. Everything I've seen of his is gorgeous and brilliant with colour, and thick impasto acrylic paint, I think it is. You can see the swirls and the fatness of the paint on his brush. Look at that dragon. It's the kind of book I would have loved at school, and I wouldn't really read the words. It would look as if I was terribly interested in poetry, and of course I wouldn't be as much as I was. You can see Raoul Dufy in there actually, can't you? The black lines pasted over the dried paint. Yeah, I'd be far more interested in the pictures than the words, but that's all right. You know, there was no shame in that. I don't think. I think you can leaf through books and the words are just a bit of decoration around the pictures. It's a terrible thing to say, but it's a kind of reversal, isn't it? The words illustrate the pictures rather than the words elucidate the pictures rather than the other way around. It's a lovely book, and it was quite dear, actually. It comes from a shop in Heaton Moor where they do nice picture books, and sometimes they're slightly pricey. Another postcard from the time, Joy to the World. It's a Christmassy one with a carol on the back. Magic, isn't it? I feel like I should be taking them out and keeping them in my box of bookmarks back there. I hope I'm not making bristly noises on this microphone with my beard. I hope not. Right, last book. Another favourite writer, Tony Warren, who created Coronation Street. And in the 90s, he wrote 4 novels that kind of interlink. They have characters who cross over. Characters, there's a spiritualist, there's a writer, there's an actor, all around Manchester. And you can see how they kind of pay into or come from Tony Warren's own biography. He writes funny, silly, sexy, soapy novels. That's what they are. I remember seeing him in Waterstones, checking that the books were on display enough in the mid-90s when his first one, The Lights of Manchester, came out. And I was breathless with starstruckness, whatever the adjective is. I couldn't believe I was seeing this person who created Coronation Street. And when I first kind of knocked about in Manchester, you'd see a lot of famous people around the place back then. When Granada Studios were based in the middle of the city, see people from Coronation Street, see pop stars. But seeing Tony Warren book shopping, or rather examining the display of his own books, this quite loud, quite camp man, was amazing. And a few years after that, because we had friends in common, I got to have tea at the Midland Hotel with this great hero. And I've told the story before, but not on here, I don't think. I said to him, you know, you've ruined my life in lots of ways. Um, How? He said in his querulous voice. And I said, well, in Corrie, when somebody has a situation with friends, they go and take them aside and tell them off and demand to know what's going on. And they go, listen, lady. And I said, it's really, you know, if you do that in real life, people get very affronted. And if you, you know, ask them to speak their mind, or ask them what the bother is, or, you know, what's the subtext even. And it's you know, it's caused a lot of rows. And he said, Paul, that's on telly. This, what we're in now, is real life. Never go around doing listen, lady, to people, he said. And then he hooted with laughter at me. He was very kind, very generous. Uh, he read novels of mine as they came out. They came out for my birthday with a whole bunch of people, and sat regaling the table with terrible stories about being psychic, I think, and channeling Nancy Spain. There was something about channeling old camp novelists of the past. And every morning he would phone me after each episode of Celebrity Big Brother and laugh down the phone about what had happened on Big Brother the night before, especially the episodes with Jackie Stallone and Bridget Nielsen in. He thought that was the funniest thing ever. Anyway, happy memories of Tony Warren, who I didn't know for very long. It was at the end of his life, and he was really good company and very supportive. I've got the funniest Christmas cards from him. One Christmas card he wrote out in the person of Sam, the spirit guide belonging to Derek Acora. Off Most Haunted, he pretended I was getting Christmas cards from Sam, the spirit guide. A rare sense of humour. Anyway, I'm going to go. That's my heap of purple books, plucked more or less at random from my heaving shelves. I don't even know what colour's next. Red and yellow and pink. Green, purple, orange is next. It's not going to be 10 Penguin contemporary classics, because that would be dull. I will look around for the orange shelves. But in the meantime, I'm going to say goodbye and wish you all happy reading and happy adventures. And we'll talk again soon.